For decades, his name has barely crossed the headlines. There are no movies about him, no biographies. But for the intelligence agencies of the United States and Europe, he is enemy number one. He controls an international criminal network. He commands more than 250 men, and his political connections reach the highest levels of power in Russia and Ukraine. No one has seen his face in years. No one knows for sure where he is. But everyone knows his name. Semion Mogilevich, nicknamed by the press as the brain of Russian organized crime. For the FBI, he is simply the most dangerous of them all. Today, we unravel his story. A man who built a criminal empire hidden beneath the appearance of respectability. A ghost who manipulates governments, moves billions, and who, despite everything, has never paid for his crimes. His rise to power was as silent as it was devastating. But it all began much earlier, on the margins of the Soviet Union. Little is known about his childhood. What is known is that he obtained a degree in economics from the Ivan Franko National University of Lviv. But far from pursuing a conventional career, he chose another path, that of crime. In the mid-1970s, he began operating in the black market for currency exchange, facilitating illegal conversions for criminal networks. In 1974, he was arrested for these activities. 3 years later, he went back to prison for fraud. But those years behind bars did not stop him. On the contrary, they served as his training ground. During his time in prison, he forged ties with key figures in organized crime. Upon release, he opened a funeral planning business. It was legal, at least on the surface. But the real leap came in the 1980s. He exploited the desperation of thousands of Ukrainian and Russian Jews who were trying to emigrate. He offered them help to sell jewelry, art, and valuables before leaving the country. He was supposed to manage the sales and send them the money. He never did. He kept everything. With that money, he built a fortune. He financed jewelry stores and factories on both sides of the continent. But behind those shining shop windows, there was a machinery of theft. Sacred art, antiques, and unique pieces disappeared from churches, museums, and private collections. At the same time, he began to associate with a group known as the Lubertzi, a collective that, although outwardly athletic and disciplined, would soon reveal a much darker face. Founded as a club for young enthusiasts of bodybuilding, gymnastics, and boxing, the Lubertzi had strict rules. No cheating in fights, no attacks on women or couples, and an absolute rejection of fascism and Nazism. They also despised Western fashions, especially hippies and punks, whom they saw as a threat to Soviet identity. Over time, their ideals deteriorated. Ideology became an excuse, and their members began to be recruited by criminal organizations. Physically imposing and accustomed to violence, they were the perfect profile. By the 1992, Russian organized crime relied on these former athletes, as well as war veterans and ex-policemen, to carry out extortion, violent collections, and assassinations. It was in this very context that Mogilevich forged a key relationship. His friendship with Sergei Mikhailov, founder of the criminal organization Solntsevskaya Bratva, also known as the Sons of Solntsevo. Mikhailov, a former waiter turned crime boss, led one of the most active gangs in the country. He recruited young, unemployed, aggressive men willing to do whatever was necessary. They established their base of operations along the M3 highway, a strategic route to Ukraine. From there, they built a network that combined vehicle trafficking, extortion, and political connections. Mogilevich, a master of money laundering, became an essential part of the machinery. But as happens with all criminal alliances, money broke the deal. In 1995, according to former FBI agent Bob Levinson, Mogilevich was the target of an assassination attempt by his former partners. A $5 million debt was the trigger. That night, during a cabaret show in a Prague hotel, guests expected a quiet evening. But suddenly, ropes descended from the ceiling. A special intervention unit of the Czech police stormed in armed. They climbed onto the stage, and pointed machine guns at everyone. Nobody could move. Among the attendees was Uzbek drug trafficker Gafur Rakimov. According to intelligence reports, he and Mikhailov had planned to assassinate Mogilevich during that event. But something went wrong. According to Mogilevich himself, he arrived late. He saw the police presence and left the place immediately. He hid in a nearby hotel until dawn. The most widespread version suggests that someone with power inside the police had warned him. Someone wanted him alive, or preferred that the assassination not take place on Czech soil. Meanwhile, Mikhailov and his group began moving into the banking sector. With access to new financial structures, they no longer depended on Mogilevich's laundering channels. The alliance broke, and the state apparatus began to react. The Czech Ministry of the Interior banned him from entering the country for 10 years. Hungary declared him persona non grata, and the United Kingdom directly labeled him as one of the most dangerous criminals on the planet. But instead of hiding, Mogilevich reorganized. In May 1990, he founded Aragon Limited on the island of Alderney, a British tax haven. The business, on the surface, was dedicated to the trade of consumer goods. He even signed contracts with state-owned companies such as Ukrainian Railways for the sale of oil. However, the true purpose of Aragon was different: to serve as the core of his international money laundering network. In 1991, Mogilevich moved to Hungary. There he married Caitlin Papp, his current wife. It was not his first marriage. Before, he had been married to Tatiana Marova, and later to Galina Gregorievna. From these unions, he had 10 children, 9 sons all involved in his criminal organization, and a daughter whose whereabouts are unknown. It is believed he has done everything possible to hide her, fearing she could be used as a tool of reprisal. After marrying Papp, he obtained a Hungarian passport and settled with her in a fortified villa on the outskirts of Budapest. From there, he continued running his illegal operations, but also diversified his investments. He acquired local businesses, including an arms factory specializing in anti-aircraft systems. The CIA even accused him of having sold missiles and armored vehicles to Iran for a total of $20 million. And while he was strengthening his position in the arms sector, he also returned to his old methods: scams with antiques and jewelry. In Budapest, he ran a scheme in which he received Fabergé eggs for restoration. However, the originals were auctioned off, and fake copies were returned to their owners in Moscow. Around that time, he founded a chain of nightclubs known as Black and White nightclubs. But beyond entertainment, these venues were the front for an even more sinister operation. With the fall of the USSR and the reforms promoted by Mikhail Gorbachev, especially the economic restructuring known as perestroika sex work ceased to be hidden. The state sought to regulate it, control it, even tax it. Hungary was one of the first countries to apply this logic, and Mogilevich knew how to exploit the opportunity. Thousands of women, driven by poverty, turned to prostitution as a way to survive. But instead of freedom, they found exploitation networks controlled by mafias. Mogilevich, always one step ahead, turned that tragedy into a multi-million-dollar business. Prague and Budapest became epicenters of the porn industry in Eastern Europe. The clubs founded by Mogilevich flourished. But they were not just nightclubs. They operated as covert brothels, perfectly integrated into an ambiguous legal framework. Meanwhile, Mogilevich was also expanding his financial influence. By the mid-1990, he managed to gain control of Income Bank, one of the largest private banks in Russia. The operation was discreet, carried out in collaboration with its president, Vladimir Vinogradov, who in 1996 was listed as the 12th richest man in the country. But success was brief. In 1998, after the Russian financial crisis, the central bank revoked Income Bank's license. The entity collapsed completely. The fall exposed a web of fraudulent operations, and the FBI's attention was already on him. Between 1997 and 1998, Mogilevich was implicated in a fraud exceeding $150 million. The case. a massive scam of investors through manipulation of shares of YBM Magnex International, a Canadian company based on the outskirts of Philadelphia. He had total control, but he never set foot on U.S. soil. An FBI report, dated October 2009, included him on the list of the 10 most wanted fugitives. The charges ranged from wire and mail fraud to money laundering and international organized crime. Special Agent Peter Cohen-Hoven summarized it this way: "We have no jurisdiction over his crimes outside the U.S., but open reports link him to arms trafficking, contract killings, extortion, drugs, and prostitution." On a global scale, the visible face of the fraud was Jacob Bogatin, CEO of YBM Magnex. He was not a novice in the business world, nor a stranger to the shadows of organized crime. When questioned about Mogilevich's connections, he replied coldly, "We have an investor relations officer. Talk to him." He later admitted that he was aware of the accusations against his boss, but said he gave them no credit. His brother, David Bogatin, had an even more compromising record. A former Soviet military officer, he was arrested in the United States for a multi-million-dollar fraud related to gasoline taxes. After being released on bail, he fled to Poland. From there, he continued moving money through newly opened accounts and acquired several apartments in Trump Tower with the help of a partner. He was later captured, extradited, and sentenced to 8 years in prison. In 2007, the BBC confronted Mogilevich directly about the YBM case. His response was as ironic as it was defiant. "If they found some dirty trick, let them prove it. I don't have access to FBI files." YBM Magnex was not an isolated operation. Several Russian organized crime bosses participated in the scam. The case was uncovered thanks to a Canadian journalistic investigation, and in 2003, Mogilevich was formally indicted in Pennsylvania, along with 2 accomplices. They faced 45 charges. But they never stood trial. They never set foot on U.S. soil, nor traveled to countries that would allow their extradition. In August 1999, the scandal grew larger. Several newspapers, including the New York Times, cited FBI sources linking Mogilevich to the laundering of $10 billion through the Bank of New York. The accounts used were registered under the name of a company, Benex Worldwide Limited, under his direct control. But the scandal was not limited to money. Behind the transactions, there were silenced voices, bought, and lethal threats. One of the most revealing cases was that of journalist Robert Friedman. In 1998, he wrote an extensive report for the Village Voice, detailing Mogilevich's businesses and his role as a key figure in global organized crime. For this, he had accessed documents from the FBI and Israeli intelligence services. A month after publication, the FBI warned him that his life was in danger. A crime boss had ordered his murder. According to the New York Times, it was Mogilevich himself who offered $100,000 for his head. The threat was intercepted in a phone conversation by the CIA. Friedman was forced to go into hiding for a time. Later, he returned to New York. It wasn't the first time someone wanted him dead. Throughout his career, Friedman had investigated the darkest corners of international mafias. Among his most striking articles was one exposing how the Russian Mafia had infiltrated the National Hockey League, using extortion and harassment as tools of control. After publishing that article, he received a Valentine's Day card. It wasn't a romantic joke. It was signed by Vyacheslav Ivankov, one of the most feared bosses of the Russian Mafia. In his report titled "The Most Dangerous Mobster in the World," Robert Friedman not only revealed previously unknown details about Mogilevich, he also gave a name to the organization surrounding him, the Red Mafia. That's how international law enforcement agencies began to call it. A lethal, disciplined, and brutal network, made up of young recruits trained by veterans of the Soviet war in Afghanistan. These thugs were not improvisers. They were soldiers turned executioners. When a businessman refused to collaborate with Mogilevich or simply did not accept his extortion terms, the punishment was immediate. Victims were stabbed, tortured, mutilated. The bodies, according to police reports, were left in such atrocious conditions that even other mafias did not want to see them. The Red Mafia reached the top of organized crime in just 6 years. Although its base of operations was in Budapest, it had active cells in places as diverse as New York, California, and New Zealand. By then, Mogilevich already had a nickname among those who knew him closely: the Brainy Don. Not by chance. He was cold, calculating, and ruthlessly intelligent. Unlike other mobsters, he had a university education and a perfectly functional corporate structure. Until the publication of the article in 1998, his name barely circulated in public. But according to the documents obtained by Friedman, his power was overwhelming. One of his closest partners was a man known as Mana, who did not hesitate to define him this way: "He is the most powerful mobster in the world. He is my best friend." They were so close that, after an assassination attempt against Mana in Brooklyn, Mogilevich organized his evacuation. He moved him to Italy and placed him there as a key piece in another of his multiple money laundering operations. Eventually, Mana was arrested and extradited to the United States. But the records made one thing clear: Mogilevich was not just another boss. He was the entire system. By the late 1992s, intelligence services were linking him to practically every imaginable crime: trafficking of nuclear material, drugs, people, antiques, artworks, and precious stones. Nothing was beyond his reach. He controlled air terminals in Moscow to move shipments without oversight. He even bought a bankrupt airline with the goal of transporting heroin without restrictions. And that wasn't all. Much of Mogilevich and his Red Mafia's success was not explained solely by their brutality or intelligence. There was an equally powerful factor: corruption. Police, judges, politicians, everything was negotiable. In 1994, one of Mogilevich's closest lieutenants was seen sharing space with U.S. politicians at a Republican Party fundraising event in Dallas. This same individual held a high position in the Ukrainian Railway Administration and had already been convicted of bribery in his country. The FBI wrote in one of its reports, "The corrupting influence of Mogilevich's organization apparently extends even to Russian law enforcement bodies." In 1995, 2 colonels from Russia's Presidential Security Service traveled to Hungary under commercial cover. Their objective: to meet with Mogilevich and obtain strategic information to use in the Russian political campaign. According to intelligence documents, an Israeli associate of the boss facilitated the meeting and provided the agents with sensitive data. The same pattern repeated itself: favors, information, impunity. It also became known that Mogilevich bribed a Russian judge to secure the release of his most feared associate, Vyacheslav Ivankov, the same mobster who had threatened journalist Robert Friedman. At the time, Ivankov was serving a sentence in Siberia for robbery and torture. But Mogilevich's connections did not end there. Despite being on the FBI's watch list and banned from entering the United States, he managed to enter the country several times. He used false passports and visas obtained in Tel Aviv. When on U.S. soil, his visits focused on 2 people: Ivankov and Mana. His financial operations also continued. He had set up dozens of shell companies in the U.S., channeling millions of dollars coming from Aragon Limited, his money laundering headquarters. And as if that were not enough, in April 1998, something even more disturbing was revealed. German intelligence had made a secret deal with Mogilevich. According to several reports, the BND, Germany's foreign intelligence service, had long been trying to investigate the Russian Mafia. But they hit a wall. The Russian government itself refused to cooperate. Frustrated, they decided on something unusual: to approach Mogilevich directly. They offered him protection in exchange for information. At that moment, the most wanted boss on the continent officially became an informant for a European power. The news unleashed a scandal. It was revealed by the German network ZDF, which cited a Belgian investigator specialized in Russian organized crime. For many in Europe, it was a low blow. The BND's decision made it nearly impossible to investigate Mogilevich, shielding him from within. But Germany was not the only country that had him in its sights. In 1994, British authorities were alerted by Eastern European agencies. The London Metropolitan Police began closely monitoring Mogilevich's operations. The suspicions were clear. He was using London law firms to launder millions of dollars from arms trafficking, drugs, and other criminal activities. John Wanless, a British officer from the Financial Crimes Unit, made it clear in an interview with the Sunday Times. Semion Mogilevich is one of the most dangerous criminals in the world. He has a fortune estimated at more than $100 million. Because of his financial impact on the City of London, we consider him a central criminal. In 1999, investigators tried to interrogate him in relation to the Bank of New York money laundering case, but they failed. The boss was still one step ahead. But almost a decade later, the unexpected happened. In January 2008, international media began reporting that Semion Mogilevich had been arrested in Moscow. He was 61 years old. He was captured by an operation of 50 agents while leaving a supermarket. His bodyguards were also detained. The press described him as aged, marked face, leather jacket, cap, jeans. Nothing remained of the supposedly untouchable magnate. At that time, he still faced outstanding charges in the United States for fraud, money laundering, and organized crime. But he was detained using another name, Sergei Schneider. An official spokeswoman declared, "Mogilevich is a person with multiple identities, multiple citizenships, and has been wanted by the authorities of several countries for 15 years. Along with him, Vladimir Nekrasov was arrested, a businessman known for his cosmetics empire and his passion for art. Owner of the Arbat prestige chain, he was also accused of tax evasion. Russian tax authorities demanded payment of $5 million in taxes and penalties. In March 2008, it was announced that Nekrasov could face up to 7 years in prison if found guilty. But, as in almost all stories surrounding Mogilevich, the case fizzled out. In July 2009, both were released. The authorities stated that the maximum period of preventive detention had expired, and that the crimes were not serious enough to justify their imprisonment. They clarified, however, that the case had not been closed. Mogilevich's lawyers denied any involvement in illicit activities, and in 2011, the Russian judiciary dismissed the case for absence of crime. Moreover, Russia was adamant. It would not extradite Mogilevich to the United States. Its constitution prohibits it. According to the Moscow Times, the case had already been crumbling since October 2010. The Tushinsky District Court pointed to procedural irregularities, while the arbitration court annulled the tax claims. Both Mogilevich and Nekrasov claimed that the accusation was a maneuver by business rivals to take over their companies. But, as always, they refused to provide further details. But the business that most concerned international intelligence services was not arms trafficking, nor tax evasion, nor even money laundering. It was natural gas. According to the FBI, one of the greatest causes for alarm was that Semion Mogilevich had direct influence over the gas pipelines crossing Eastern Europe. Before Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Russia supplied between 30% and 40% of the gas consumed by the European Union, hundreds of millions of cubic meters per day. Controlling that flow meant holding Europe in his hand. Money laundering expert John Wood, in a report for the International Political Science Association, was clear. Mogilevich's activities were never accidental. He had been preparing his entry into the energy sector for decades. As early as 1991, his company Arbat International began operating in oil import and export. But the key move came in 2002, when his lawyer Zev Gordon founded Ural Transgas, ETG, a company that became the main intermediary between Ukraine and Turkmenistan. Later, ETG was replaced by another company, Rosukrenergo, DRE, registered in Switzerland. and partially owned by Ukrainian oligarch Dmytro Firtash. Until 2009, RU was the only authorized channel to import gas from Gazprom, the Russian energy giant, and resell it to Ukraine's main energy company. For years, there was speculation about the ties between Mogilevich and RU. There was no definitive proof, but the rumors were persistent. In 2010, Ukrainian Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko claimed to have documented evidence that powerful criminal structures were hiding behind Rosukrenergo. She had long been trying to eliminate intermediaries from the gas business. She had even reached an agreement with Vladimir Putin, which he never fulfilled. For his part, Firtash denied any direct relationship with Mogilevich, although he admitted having asked him for permission to operate in Ukraine as early as 1986. He argued that in that country, doing business without the approval of organized crime was impossible. A WikiLeaks leak revealed more. In the documents, Firtash admitted to having received authorization from Mogilevich, although he insisted they were not close. However, the same reports indicated that both were linked through offshore companies and shared personal connections, including the same lawyer. Firtash amassed an enormous fortune from the gas trade. His net worth, according to the leaked information, exceeded several billions of dollars. Today, the Red Mafia, led by Mogilevich, is considered one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world. It is estimated to have at least 250 active members, and a solid hierarchical structure, with presence in multiple countries and illicit businesses on an international scale. His empire extends across financial fraud, drug trafficking, prostitution, human trafficking, arms smuggling, contract killings, and manipulation of stock markets. Throughout his criminal career, Mogilevich has woven relationships with key figures of power in Eastern Europe, including Vladimir Putin, former Moscow Mayor Yuri Lushkov, and Leonid Derkach, former head of Ukraine's security service. In 2005, after a change in the leadership of Ukraine's security service, a 30,000-page file documenting his activities since 1993 was destroyed, despite an explicit order to preserve all records. It was perhaps the most complete archive on his criminal network, and it disappeared. Mogilevich has built alliances with the most feared mafias on the planet, from the Russian Mafia to the Italian Camorra. Always in the shadows, always protected, always one step ahead. Journalist Robert Friedman, who investigated him for years, concluded that his true power did not lie in violence, but in his financial intelligence, his leadership skills, and his ability to buy loyalties in the highest places of power. FBI agent Peter Covenhoven summed it up bluntly. Victims mean nothing to him. It's all about money and influence. And the most terrifying thing is that he is willing to work with any criminal, no matter their ideology. Semion Mogilevich represents more than just a criminal, with fortune and contacts. He represents the true face of hidden power, one that does not need exposure, that does not seek fame, because it already controls everything from the shadows. For decades, he built a criminal empire of unimaginable proportions. He infiltrated banks, governments, energy industries, and judicial systems. He manipulated economies, silenced enemies, and maintained his freedom where others would have fallen. And the most unsettling thing is that, despite the alerts, the reports, and the arrest warrants, he is still free today. This is not just the story of one man. It is the portrait of a system where money, influence, and corruption are more powerful than any law. If this video has revealed a side of the world you didn't know, we invite you to go further. Subscribe to the channel to discover more true stories of mafias, international crime, and covert operations that have shaped history. Every week we publish 2 documentaries with rigor, immersive storytelling, and fact-based content. And if you want to see a particular case, leave it in the comments. We read each one, and the best become future episodes. This is not entertainment. This is the story no one wants to tell you. Thank you for being here. See you in the next documentary.